And there we go. So for those of you who are joining this is the Joust 40th anniversary interview series. And today we have Noah Falstein with me, and we're going to talk Joust, John Newcomer, testing, debugging, telling you who he is. So Noah's like my favorite rock star when it comes to all the things that I've seen on people's resumes, and he wouldn't tell you all this stuff because he's so nice. But chief of Google Games, chief game designer of Google. I think maybe that's what your title was. Game of the year at least twice. Worked at Lucasfilm Games, DreamWorks. First chairperson at the International Game Developers Association, which I think it would be cool if they interfaced with, if all these organizations interface a little bit better. But as a nonprofit person, I work in nonprofits also in my industry. I think it's always good when there's a lot of synergy because there's so many people that are interrelated, which we just talked about a little bit. Working on multiple platforms, the list of games that you worked on, Indiana Jones, Cronus Rift, Strike Fleet, Labyrinth, and of course, Sinistar and Joust. So with that introduction, we have Noah Falstein here with us. So Noah, we went through a little bit of a list of stuff that you'd like to cover, which I think is always the best way to cover stuff, is cover what the people who are here would like to say. So I'll just kind of run you through a little bit of that. And it's, what are your most memorable Joust stories? Because I know you've got a couple.
Sure. Well, I should say, I came to Williams as Joust was just finishing up. So my role was pretty minor. In fact, I met with John Newcomer and we talked about different things that I could do. And he said, well, to kind of get you up to speed and to look at the software and get a sense of everything, why don't you help us with the final testing before we release this? And so Joust for me was just kind of a trial by fire and getting a chance to try stuff out. And, it put me in a position where I couldn't do any harm as I started to learn what was going on. I'd say probably the strongest memory I have is something I know that you've covered. I watched your interview with Foots, and the moment when he found out that there was a bug in the release version and that people were being able to have unlimited lives. I was in an adjacent room or nearby, and I just suddenly heard him say, what? And he was so intense that a crowd gathered around his office, and he's on the phone saying, yeah, and then what? Oh no, and just going on and on. And meanwhile, we're clustered around. Finally, he hangs up the phone, and maybe it was John Newcomer said, what's going on? He says, just come with me. And we went downstairs to the first floor where there was a little playroom with about 10 games that we would rotate around, the Williams games, but also some of our competitors were always there. And there were a couple of Joust machines because it had just been released to the public a few weeks earlier. And he goes up to one of them and plays through a few levels, and we kept asking, what's going on? Just a minute. And he gets to one of the first levels where the pterodactyl would come out, and he flies and lands on the middle ledge. And the first pterodactyl comes out, and he taps the joystick to point towards it, and bam, it flies right into his lance. Says, whoa, that's so cool. And the next one comes out, flies into his lance from the other side. And all he had to do was just endlessly switch back and forth and was killing them all off. And anyway, it was, there had to be one egg there, but every time the egg was about to hatch, he would just hover over it and hatch, he'd kill whatever, there was a shadow lord eventually was coming out. And then he'd just land back on the ledge and kill pterodactyls. And we were just, so mortified by that, because at that point there had been probably a couple thousand units released and they all had to be updated.
Right, the red realm version. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I played on that version 1982, hadn't been out very long, and there was a bet on whether it could be, because you would play it 10, 12 hours a day when I was off, and people would say there was a bet in Nevada on whether it could be played 24 hours or not. It was Nevada, so there's a bet on everything, and played it 24 hours, and we documented on one of those. I don't know if it's an ended chief or yellow pad, but they documented every hour and took a Polaroid. So you had the hour, the score, and the person's initials, and a Polaroid to match it, and then they took a Polaroid of all that when it was over and sent it to Williams, and Williams sent me back this really nice letter and a shirt and said, "This is incredible. We've never heard of anybody playing 24 hours. You're the world champion. Here's a shirt. Cool." Not necessarily in that vernacular, but
Sure.
And I'm like, dude, I so wish I still had that letter, and I so wish that I still fit that shirt. That's probably more important.
Yeah, well, we've all changed a bit. I actually had hair down to my shoulders when I was working at Williams.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, but it was so cool. We didn't know about. There's so many things about the game that you learn over time and playing it, and I heard about that, and we instantly said that's cheating, and nobody would do it. But then we saw all these massive scores coming up, and you're like, you know that this is happening. And John gave me a version of that was burnt. Of course, I have red ROMs and I have green ROMs, but he gave me a set of ROMs burnt on blue Robotron ROMs. That was a test that he put in Mothers. And so I have that one framed at my house, which is one of those little pieces of history that the test is on a Robotron chip. Yeah. So that was cool. And then that one also had the slide through the ledges, which is still I use that all the time when I play. It's just like, got to get here, got to get away from this.
Yeah, well, I think in my long career and the hundreds of games I've worked on, I don't think there's a single game that went to release that didn't have some kind of bug that we decided to leave in because it actually made the game more fun.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I like about working in video games. I did a little bit of work in college in programming for financial systems. And of course, they had no humor and no tolerance for any kind of bugs. With games, it's just as likely that if something doesn't go right, if it's fun, just leave it in.
Exactly.
It's one of the things I've always enjoyed about that aspect of the industry.
Then the ability that nobody thought you'd get past Wave 99 because it was 1982 and nobody knew. But
sure.
The mind can overcome so many things. It's pretty amazing how long somebody can play games now. So that's we got that one. 4-player free play variation to the game that evolved in the game room. Tell me that one. I found that interesting.
So this game room that we had, as I said, was where we would gather, particularly around lunchtime. People would take a break and play games. And there were a bunch of competitors' games. I remember Qbert was a real favorite for people, but Joust, for the time I was at Williams, remained popular all the way through. That and Robotron, I think, were the two favorites. Defender and Stargate were really challenging for a lot of people. It was just meant to be that way. And with Joust, this sort of evolved just out of people doing this naturally and having the games all set on free play. If you had to keep putting quarters in, this probably wouldn't have worked. But we would, at first people would just do one-on-one, 2 people to see who could win.
Right.
And there always were more people wanting to play. So we kind of evolved into this thing where we had 2 teams of 2 people. And the way it would work is that if I was on a team with you, I would start with the first bird. And as soon as I died, I step out and you take the next one, and we basically alternate. But when the person who isn't playing instead of just being a spectator, their job is to trash talk the other guy while this is all happening. And as a consequence, the real peak of this, I remember Mike Metz, who did a lot of the sound effects work on, he did it on Sinistar and other games. I remember one time where he was playing and the other guy said something to him that was just so funny that he started laughing and immediately lost a life and just, threw up his hands and says, "That's it, you win the game with that one." But it was a great way to play. I mean, it was, it actually kind of bonded people and we got to know each other, and people really were merciless about the kinds of jokes about this quality of play, or, making personal comments, nothing too racy, but, "Oh, stayed up drinking too late last night, you gotta watch that flapping."
Yeah, you get 50 points every time you die. So, let's see how come you're ahead.
Exactly.
That's excellent. I've never heard that story before. I just made a note there. Trash talking doubles. And of course, that's called cutthroat in vernacular of professional competition. I won the U.S. national video game team cutthroat tournament. And it's always played on level 9, on difficulty 9, only 5 men. And to add that component to it, I think would be interesting, where it's 2 people playing against 2 people and being a distractor. I love that. That's something we're going to have to do when we have a tournament at some point. I'm digging that. We're going to have to bring that one back. Yeah, this is, besides meeting and getting to talk to you, that's going to be at the very top of my fun list. Variation of the game. There was like a variation of the game too. It's like Condor or something like that, where they linked 4 cabinets together or something like that.
Never heard of that one.
Yeah, it was evolving at some point. There are pictures of it someplace. Then you said less directly, starting at the company, being briefed by John and the games he was working on, and Juggernaut, Joust, Juggernaut becoming a specific game. So I thought I'd let you talk about that one, because that one had very close proximity to you.
Well, John was a real mentor to me, and he was the first person I met. Well, I should say I had spent 2.5 years in the games industry before I came to Williams, working for Milton Bradley, who was not generally known for video games, but they got into it in the early 80s, actually in 1980, because of the success of their Simon game. And Simon, amazingly, is still available right now. I mean, I was actually in a toy store just a couple weeks ago, and the electronics are completely different now, but the game is identical, looks the same, and runs the same as this 43-year-old version now. But that made them so much money, they got into video games. And I came in to the company having worked in the games industry for a while, which was very unusual. There was very few people at Williams that had actually come from another game company. And despite that, when I met John, the thing that amazed me is that I had never met somebody who was a full-time game designer before. Game design had always been something that it was expected you would do, is usually the programmers. I mean, usually at that stage, in many companies, a game was a one-person thing. Somebody came up with the idea, coded it, did the graphics and the sound. And the graphics, of course, very crude, taking a piece of graph paper and coloring it in. And the arcade industry was really the cream of the crop. It was where the best work was going on. As the quality of the artists that we had there was excellent, and a real revelation for me working with professional artists rather than just coloring in graph paper. But John was particularly interesting because I have always loved the design part more than anything else, and seeing that he was a full-time designer made me think, wow, maybe I should actually move towards that, because I could code, but I was always aware there were people who were much better at programming computers. And so, when I came in, like I think many of the people who came to Williams, he was my first stop, and he had this big portfolio case with a bunch of drawings and kept putting things out. And he showed me the early drawings for Joust and a bunch of prototype ideas that he had kicking around. The Juggernaut one became Sinistar, and I ended up taking over and becoming the project leader on that one. But what I really appreciated was how open and sharing John was. And as you've known, he's just such a really nice guy and very willing to help anyone. And I just feel very privileged to have gotten to work with him in those early days.
Oh, very, very, very cool. So there's your connection to Sinistar too, which, I jokingly tell people as a player that Williams had some of the most evil geniuses ever, because all their games were just brutally difficult, but they compelled you to play them even though they were beating you. And I love the design and the difficulty and the thought that went into them and the artwork that went into them, and the fact that these games still exist 40 plus years later and have been ported to so many different platforms. And now you've got Joust and Ready Player One, although not quite the same as the book, still prevalent. The dynamics on Bubbles, Killer Queen. The creators of Killer Queen will be there. Interestingly enough, we were talking, Eugene Jarvis wasn't a big fan of Joust. He just didn't get it, is what I was told. And now Eugene makes Joust. Basically he's making Killer Queen, which is Joust. So, it all comes kind of full circle over the years.
Sure.
And it's, I find that all so much fun and interesting stuff. Let's see, I think there was one other thing that you wanted to, finding it. I was going through my Williams stuff the other day, and I still have a Williams stock certificate from the 80s signed by Mike Stroll. I said,
that's great.
I don't think it's worth anything now. And I still have one from the 80s. Where is it? Your impressions of Williams Electronics, some of the traditions and the rivalries between pinball and video games.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was actually a really interesting thing coming into the company when I did. It had been a pinball company for decades. And there was this one guy, oh boy, and I'm going to blank out on his name now. This bugs me. This is what happens as you get older. He had been around since, I think, the 1930s or certainly 40s, and the older guy had worked on pinball and the shuffle alleys and all the other mechanical things, and had seen it come and go. And he was telling us that, oh yeah, this video game thing, it's a nice fad, but pinball is where the action's at. And we were saying, politely, yeah, sure, this is the future. You don't know what you're talking about. And the interesting thing is that in '83, he was right, that there was this implosion of all the video games. And if it wasn't for pinball, the Williams might have gone out of business, but it was one of the few companies that kept making, pins and managed to pull through. And God, I wish I could remember this guy's name. The other folks on the team would, because he just passed away a few years ago at like 98 or something.
Oh, wow.
And he'd been working since a kid at Williams. But it really gave me a sense of the background and traditions of pinball and how the video games were just a new step in this whole process. And there was, I think everybody else, the people who made the pinball games were playing our video games, and vice versa. I still love to play pinball games when I get a chance. I was never an expert, but better than a layman who didn't have them on free play all the time. But one of the things I remember in particular, though, is when the pinball games were being tested, they would go through a burn test where they would go through every possible mechanical gate over and over again for hours and hours to see if anything, would break down. And when I was working on Sinistar, I was there. It was crunching to have a demo the next morning, and I basically had to stay up all night working in my office and try and grab a few hours of sleep by pushing a few chairs together. But at around 5:30, people were starting to leave, and I heard next door a guy named Corey who was working on a pinball game, and I heard from his office just on the other side of the wall, bunkada, 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 boom, 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 ka-cha-chung, 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 over and over and over again. And I thought, this is just not going to work. And I went over to ask him, could you please do this some other time? And he had left and locked his door. So I had to finish and get ready for a Sinistar demo the next morning with that god awful noise. And I did get a couple hours of sleep just out of pure exhaustion at probably 6 a.m. before people started coming in. But I just gave Corey, quite a tongue lashing afterwards. But it was all in good fun. And, it was really great having a mix of the software that I was working on, but the hardware, the digital hardware of the folks that were adding to the different types of chips that we were using. And Williams was at the cutting edge of having the best software for that sort of thing and best hardware. And of course, the mechanical engineers that would make the joysticks and buttons and build the cabinets. And all of us were from these different creative groups working together, which is something that I really have only experienced extremely rarely since then, because usually you're in a vacuum and only working, say, on the software on some existing piece of hardware, or there are hardware developers that, the software is just something they use to test it. But that was one of the few cases where all three of these disciplines were being as creative as possible and trying to work together on it.
Sounds like the synergy of those three things working together made it all that much better.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I still love the fact that the arcade industry was the only time, I think, in history where designers could actually specify the physical hardware that would control it, whether it's a button or a joystick or, new type of controller with a proportional joystick, all sorts of things that we experimented with.
Nice.
And now you kind of have to work with what you're given.
Yeah. You have to work with whatever platform it is. And now all these games from the 80s are all into PlayStation and Xbox and GameCube, and they live on forever and ever and ever. And we have arcades and beercades and barcades and museums. And I don't want to say it's a revival of the arcades, but definitely an appreciation for the culture that founded the video game industry and as it is today. So
yeah, there's a company in LA, 2-Bit Circus, that's run by a couple of people, including one of the sons of Nolan Bushnell, who made Pong.
right.
And they're kind of reviving the idea of not so much arcades, but gathering places that combine arcades and multiplayer gaming and social gaming, and also virtual reality, a lot of other new technologies to bring people together physically in a location. They've taken a hit with the pandemic, but they're doing quite well.
Yeah, there were a lot of arcades and that shut down because of the pandemic. So just couldn't. I mean, a lot of businesses overall shut down because they just couldn't survive. I even tried to take a tour out to help promote them. I went to about 30 locations to say I'm gonna be there, use my presence to support your organization however you can, bring some news people out, get some press. And it was really, I mean, it was damaging to everybody. It's still damaging to people's psyche and their health, but it seems to be getting much better. Was that Tyler Bushnell that you were talking about? I think it's
Brent Bushnell.
Yeah, I think I've met Tyler. Pretty fun family there. I know we sent the original Atari awards from the Hall of Fame to Nolan. He did the acceptance on them, and we're trying to infiltrate Atari a little bit better, which seems to be taking a little bit of time. So the one question I really have to ask: who was the better Joust player, you or John Newcomer?
Wow.
You know I was going to go there, right?
You know, one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older is that we all tend to, gradually improve our memories of things. And my first instinct was that I remembered beating John, but I'm pretty sure that that was because it was a real rare occasion, and in general, he was much better. In fact, I remember John was one of the people who was particularly good at trash talking, in a very friendly way, but very devastating, as we were playing in that cutthroat mode. But yeah, I have to concede it to him that I've never been a great game player. I know so many people are better than I am. And you're talking about how hard the Williams games were. I actually got to tune Sinistar myself, and I did it by making it harder and harder until I couldn't play it very well, because I knew that was how I felt about Stargate, for example, that had been the level we were kind of looking at. And I figured if I was struggling and couldn't quite make it, then maybe it was hard enough for people like you and the public. So it's kind of ironic, because I'm one of the few people who assume, like with Sinistar, oh, you made the game, you must be great at it. No, in fact, I designed it so that I wasn't great at it, because that's how I knew that it was tough enough. And that was before they forced us to actually shorten the playtime and make it even a little harder. So that was
you could only have to have 2 minutes on the game. Got to have that quarter, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we were averaging around 3 minutes, and just had to speed it up.
So I will also admit, a contest I won, I went there only to win the contest so that I could play against John, and won pretty much out of fear, because they knew who I was. And and I just let them kill themselves by them being afraid of me, and them flying away from me, and it's on level 9 and you're gonna die. So, and you're flying around and I'm pretty stationary, so they're going after you. And John knew I was there. He's like, you just came here to play me, didn't you? And I was like, yeah, it's your birthday too, so I'm gonna trash you on your birthday. And he got the best kill of the day, and I was so happy for him. And I knew it was coming, which to me, I knew it was coming. I was exactly where I thought I wanted to be, and he exhibited more skill than I thought he had.
Well, I heard you talking about this in one of your other interviews, and yeah, that's very much John. He kind of would lay back and get you at the last moment when you weren't expecting it, like that.
Yeah.
In your case, just flapping at just the right time.
Well,
I think that was his real trick. He was really good at timing the flapping, and of course that was his favorite thing. He fought really hard to keep the flap button in there when management was concerned that it was a little bit too radical and different.
Yeah, it's it's a great, the physics of it is so simple and elegant that stands the test of time. His kill, sliding through the ledges, and I'm positioned right where I think I want to be because of the gravity that's going to pull him down. I don't know how he could flap fast enough, because I had never tried. I just projected where I was going to land, and he ended up above me, and I was like, and he killed me. I was like, whoa, how did you kill me when I was right where I wanted to be? I was so happy for him, Noah. I mean, I was like, because he was dying really, really bad. And I was like, but he got the best kill. And I think that was so fitting that he did. And it was on tape. So there is proof that he actually got it. What else is there anything else you'd like to say about John, or about the development team, or
that kind of covers it. I think you've done a good job at digging into it. As I say, the sad thing, I was only involved in the last little bit of Joust's development. That if you ever want to do a similar deep dive into Sinistar, then obviously I'm one of your guys to talk to.
We should do that. I've kind of been inspired to do that from a Hall of Fame standpoint, because many of these games are being inducted in the Hall of Fame. It would be really cool to have some sort of background interview on each game for the legacy of the games. One other question, because we know where you've been. What are you doing now? inspires you? What is the thing that you're doing now? I was reading some
Well,
of the stuff
that's
and I was like, it was like,
yeah. So I'm a freelance game designer and producer, and I've been doing this since '96 now, so a long time, except for the 4 years that I was chief game designer at Google. Um, but the last 5 years in particular, I've come to focus on the overlap of games and healthcare, which is a pretty unusual area, but I've always been really a total science nerd. And I'm fascinated by the fact that games are actually helping people medically.
yeah,
I helped launch a company called Achille Interactive that is going public later this summer, and has the first game that's been cleared by the FDA to be prescribed by doctors to treat a disease. Specifically, you play this video game and it helps people with ADHD learn how to control their attention more clearly. I'm working with another company, a German company that has a virtual reality game they're working on to address nearsightedness, and potentially this game will be something that young kids will play, and it will remove their need for glasses, or at least diminish the kind of prescription they need. And there are games now for dealing with trauma, for dealing with anxiety, for rehabilitation from injuries or from stroke, games to diagnose things, games to train physicians. And I just love that. So I love variety too. So I'm advising or consulting for I think about 8 different companies in this space right now.
I'm pretty nerdy myself, and when I've always been a proponent of video games being very good for mental acuity and being able to keep your brain active. And even when I'm not doing something specific, I'll go over and play a tough game to keep my mind sharp. And to see that you were doing these things to improve people's health, which I think that did anyway. I think my brain was a lot more active, always playing 200 plus machines over a decade than it had been previously, because I wasn't using that part of my brain like I did when I was young. And to see you do that, I think is part of what gaming had to go to. I mean, there's this bad side that games are violent, but there's also this part where games are good. They're really good for people and for the medical needs that people have. And I found that very inspiring that you were doing that.
Great, thanks. I mean, it's been both gratifying to help people with medical issues, but also fascinating as a designer to try and deal with, one of the things I like about making games that have medical purposes is that all the games I work on have to have some fun component, but with entertainment, fun is the be all and end all. With the medical side of things, it's just the mechanism by which we help deliver whatever the treatment is. And there have been times that it's really difficult for me, but I have to realize that, well, let's add this feature in, and it'll make the game less fun, but it'll be more effective in treating ADHD or whatever the case may be. And that's an interesting thing for me, because it's a great challenge. And, I've worked on so many different games that finding new challenges is one of the most important things to keep me excited and interested in this sort of thing.
Right. You got to keep your brain active too.
Exactly.
All right, sir. It's been a true honor. Wish you could have been here tomorrow, but I'm saving this one to give to John specifically before it goes out to anybody else. And
excellent. Well, he knows I've always respected him. I tried to hire him at LucasArts, and we weren't able to make that happen. But he's just a great guy, and Foots as well. It was nice seeing your interview with him. Just brought back a lot of very fond memories. As we age, I'm sometimes surprised at the way people look now, and I'm sure they're shocked at how I look. Yeah. But I hear their voices and the cadences, and it's like, oh yeah, suddenly I've gone back 40 years, and it's really nice.
I was very, I guess, when I started touring, I'll just give you a little history. Python was the first person that started following me playing Joust across the country, and he started telling some of the development team that I was playing it because I was recording some of the stuff.
Mhm.
and he sent me some encouragement stuff too. And we kind of, my wife and I kind of adopted him as he got sick. And then I became friends with John and with Foots and Reuter. And then when the 100th Joust machine was going to be played, I was lucky enough to be able to, well, I wasn't even at 75 machines yet, but you have to plan ahead. And I stopped by Williams and said, where do you want to be, 75 or 100? And they decided, of course, it was all locked up. I had to get somebody to get me in to talk to somebody who could talk to somebody, which is nice security for the employees. And they said, we think we want to be number 100. And we planned this whole event where we had John and Python and Foots and Walter Day and Steve Sanders, who was my doubles world record holder, teaching people how to play Joust while I was playing the 100th Joust machine, which we played on the red ROMs, which gave me fits because I had probably played the last 20 or 30 machines on green ROMs. So it just that little bit of difference, which was only like 2 or 3 pixels off. And I was like, it was toasting me. I go, how fitting that the first version of the game is toasting me for a while. And it was so cool, to see Foots and Reuter and Python and John after 30 years sitting at the same table, and to watch the interaction and them to pick up like it was, to hear the discussions, and that's what you were referring to. And to be a small part of that and watching it from the sidelines has been a great honor for me.
Well, great. And if it wasn't for fans like you, then what would be the point of even making the games in the first place? So it's a mutual admiration society there.
I appreciate it, sir. You're out in California?
Yeah, just north of San Francisco.
Oh, nice. I will be, well, I think from what I heard the other day, I'm teaching in LA, and then I had another company say, will you come out and teach in San Francisco? So I may be driving up from LA to San Francisco. I teach leather cleaning, and my industry is cleaning and restoration. And I wrote books and courses, and getting ready to stop teaching. So my last course was supposed to be in LA, and I had somebody say, please come up and teach one more course before you go.
If you get a chance to drive up, I'd recommend taking Route 1 right along the coast.
Oh, yeah.
It takes hours longer than going up the Central Valley, but yeah, exactly. And there's so many iconic views from movies and stuff. Yeah. I think you'll just love that.
We took it one year from for my wife's birthday. We drove in. We flew into John Wayne, checked into our timeshare there in Newport Coast, and then I drove her all the way to the redwood forest before the big redwood tree fell over. Right. And then we took PCH all the way back. A little bit scary in some areas.
Well, it's a little scarier going south because then you're right on the edge. So going north is less stressful.
Yeah, on the inside. Yeah, it was. Yeah. But we happened to be there at the time, and it was just we got up to one vista, and just as far as you could see, whales. It was
wow.
It was just, we were just like, how many hundreds of whales do you think that is? And it was just like they were just there for us. And if we weren't up that high in that kind of little precarious area, we wouldn't have saw them. So that was cool.
So speaking of wives, I think mine is waiting for me to be done with this so that I could come in and join her. But thank you very much. This has been a real privilege, and I'm so sorry I couldn't make it down there. I really was looking forward to it, but as I explained to you, it just my co-grandparent of our new granddaughter is undergoing chemo for some breast cancer operation she had, and she's particularly vulnerable to anybody who might catch COVID or even just a bad cold. So I've had to be very careful so I can keep visiting my granddaughter as well as her.
So yeah, well, I forgot to tell you one thing that I'm going to let you go.
Sure.
Google X.
Oh yeah,
I played there, and what is the young guy's name and they took me a tour that they had an 80s event there, and I came in.
Oh, cool.
I played Joust and taught the guys how to play Joust. They put Joust.
Well,
it was great fun.
4 years I spent at Google, there were people coming up to me all the time and talking about, those games, or more often the LucasArts games I'd worked on. And it's always nice to find fans in unexpected places. In fact, the interview I had at Google, they handed me off to a guy from Google X for lunch to kind of take me to one of their cafes. And we were talking about one of the LucasArts games I'd worked on. And he started listing the musicians on that. I said, "Oh, did you know those guys?" He said, "No, I just remember the credits." And he memorized them all. It was all these brilliant people there, that this was a game he had played 30 years earlier, and he still remembered the names of all the people who'd worked on it. But yeah, it's just some pretty amazing people there. But I'm glad you got a chance to do that. I should get going now. And thanks a lot.
Have a good one.
Right.
Thank you so much for being here.
Give my best to John and everybody else who shows up, please.
Well, sir. Thanks, sir.